Hi everyone and welcome back to the Crafty Yellow Camper. Today I've got a video to show you of some swaps that I made before the new catalogue was launched back in the beginning of June. I took part in a swap to introduce the new ink colours. So this is the card that I made and I'm going to recreate it today so you can see how I did it. It uses 4 of the 5 new ink colours. And they are Moody Mauve, Boho Blue, Wild Wheat, and actually I haven't used it on here, but I'm going to use it on our card today, Copper Clay, sorry. Pebbled Path is the other colour, and I haven't used that on here. So I'll put this to one side and we'll get started. Now, actually, no, I'm going to bring it back in, ignore me. I want to show you how to make this section here first. Because we need to put that aside to dry. Now it's really hot where I am today, so hopefully it won't take too long to dry. Just reaching over for a piece of scrap paper. Now I've taken part in a online Stampin' Up event for demonstrators today, and had to clear my desk before I can film this video, but there is still a few bits left on the desk. You can just see I was using the Irresistible Blooms set. Okay, the actual set that we were using in the session is a new one that's going to be available to purchase in September, I think, called Translucent Blooms. It's a really lovely set, but I didn't get to buy it because the demonstrator pre-order was just after my mum sadly passed away and I had other things on my mind and missed the date. So you might wonder what I'm doing with an emery board and a piece of cardstock. This is the Fluid 100 watercolour paper. This is just slightly under half a sheet. It comes in sort of A5, just over A5 sections. Now I'm just smoothing off that edge. I cut it with my Stampin' Up trimmer. Watercolour paper is an awful lot thicker. You can see how, you know, it doesn't really bend. It's an awful lot thicker than our standard A4 cardstock, and I think my blades might be getting to the stage where they need to be changed soon. But if that happens to you at home, which is why I did it on camera, and you get a little bit of a raggedy edge here, just take an emery board. That's what I'd got. It's just a basic emery board, nothing fancy, and just smooth it down the edge, and that will take off any extra fibres that you've got. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to make this quite wet. So I've got an aqua painter. This isn't a Stampin' Up one, but other colours are available. Other brands are available, as I said. And all I'm going to do is make this wet. You can see I obviously haven't cleaned my aqua painter very well there because there's a little bit of Moody Mauve going on there. These were being used at a craft club I belong to. And I did the demonstration and we did some watercolouring. So that's on me for not cleaning those properly. Right, we're going to come in with some Boho Blue. Now, you'll notice that I've got some ink on the inside of my ink pad here, which is perfectly acceptable to make the inside of your ink pad a palette. And the way that you do that is to turn it over and give it a good squeeze, like that with your thumbs. And then you should pick up some ink on the inside. And that's ideal for watercolouring. But for what we want to do today, I need a little bit more ink. And the other thing that I found is that, excuse me, I was just reaching around. The other thing I found is that sometimes if you use your ink pad here as a palette and it stays wet and you don't dry it off, what can happen is that the water goes onto the sponge of the ink pad and it can degrade the foam. So if you do use your ink pad case as a palette, then make sure you dry it before you shut the ink pad. I've had to replace my Balmy Blue pad, I think. Now you can see how warm it is today. While I've been talking to you, that's dried up, and can you see that ink is not spreading how we want it to? So all I'm going to do is squeeze a bit more water on there, and then I can pull that ink across. I'm not adding any more ink. You can see that I've got ink still on my block. So yeah, that's if you don't want to, if you want a bit more ink and you don't want to risk your ink pads, then just stamp it onto a block, which will give you more than enough ink to pick up for large areas. There we go. Now, I need this to be dry because we're going to emboss this. So ordinarily we could leave it to dry, but just to give it a little bit of a helping hand, because it is now very wet because I've added quite a lot of water to get that ink to spread. So just to give it a little bit of a helping hand, you can pat it with some kitchen roll, which will help absorb any extra ink or any extra water, or you can do what I'm going to do and just give it a dry off with a heat gun. So if you'll excuse me for 2 seconds, I'm just plugging my heat gun in, and I haven't learned yet how to mute the sound, so you might want to stick your fingers in your ears for a minute. Hopefully you can still hear me talking to you over the noise of my heat gun. If your paper is really wet, and I mean absolutely soaking wet with running water on it, you might find that when you come to dry it, if you use a heat gun, that the colour will move around on the watercolour paper. That gives quite a nice look, and if you want that look, then that's fine, go ahead and really soak it. But for today's demonstration, I need it to be dry so I can run it through the embossing folder. Okay. And then run it through a die. Now you'll notice it started to curl up on the edges, and the way to undo that is just to turn it over and heat it from the back, and it should uncurl. There we go. Now that's not bone dry, but it's touch dry. Oh, sorry, I'm covered in ink from earlier, but you can see that I'm touching that and I'm not getting any blue off onto my hand, so that's dry enough. So we're going to cut a shape out of this, and we are going to emboss it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my deckled rectangle dies, and the one we want is never the first one that you grab out. Why is it always the last one? Let's just tip them all out. So you can see these go down in nesting sizes. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dies, and these smaller ones, they're alive. This one and this one are actually quite nice for greetings and tags and stuff as well. Okay, but we want, I think we used number 3 for this one. Let me just offer it up against my other card. No, we didn't. We used a slightly bigger one. Yeah, so this is the second from largest of the dies, and as you can see, it will just fit over my paper. So if you'll just excuse me for a minute, I'm just going to go and run this through my die cutting machine whilst talking to you, and then I will show you what I've used to emboss it. It doesn't really matter which way round you do this, whether you emboss it first or die cut it first. I prefer to die cut first, because if you die cut and then emboss, you stand the chance of flattening out the embossing by running it through the machine again. So my rule of thumb would always be to die cut first. Okay, the embossing folders we're going to use now are these ones. So that is the stripes and splatters, and we're going to use the splatters. And I'm just going to take that back over to my die cutting machine and run that through. Now the important thing when you're embossing, is to make sure that you always put your embossing folder in the die cutting machine with the hinge first. So that's this piece here, and make sure you have the Stampin' Up logo on the front, and then you know you've got it the right way around. Just going to quickly run that through my Stampin' Emboss machine. Ideally I would have my small machine on my desk, but there isn't room, so please excuse me for not being in your shop while I've run that through. Okay, and I'm back. Okay, so let's just get rid of these deckled edged rectangles. I wasn't sure about these when I first saw them in the catalogue, and I have to say they have spent an awful lot of time on my desk. They just give that little bit of something round the edge. I really just like that sort of deckled edge. There's no stitching or anything, it just gives that edge, and I just think it adds a little bit of interest. Okay, so let's pop our embossing folder away. If you wanted to see what the other one is like, it's almost like a wood grain. I mean, it is stripes, but you could be forgiven to, sorry, I'll get my camera to focus, could be forgiven for thinking that was almost a wood grain. And actually, if you embossed it on to something like our copper clay or the new pecan pie or early espresso, I think you probably could get away with using that as a wood grain. Okay, so now we've got this cut with the deckled rectangle edges, and it's been embossed with the splatters, and we've done our watercolouring on it, so we can put that to one side for 1 minute. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the next, let's get rid of our scrap piece. Oh, actually, no, I won't. Bring in our next piece of cardstock. Now, I'm using Very Vanilla for this. The swap card that I made, I used basic white, so the base is basic white thick, and then I've used a layer of just our standard basic white, but I thought it'd be nice to have a bit of a change. Now, as I said, my desk is very messy from this morning. You can see here I was using Berry Burst ink, must have got some on my fingers, and I picked it up ready to do this demonstration, and I've got a splatter on there, but it won't matter because we're going to use a piece of Very Vanilla cardstock over the top, so no one's going to see that. Okay, so my next tip for you today, sometimes when you're cutting cardstock, as on this one, you get this edge. I don't know if my camera's going to pick it up, but it's sort of a very slight ridge on the edge. Now, if like me, you're messy, and you've got a mark on the other side of your paper, as I did on my base, and you need to get rid of the mark, I'm sorry, I'm just looking for my rubber. There is a mark on this, but this is not, this is just a little bit of pencil. I'm just using a Tombow pencil rubber there. Yeah, if you need to flatten this out, or if you're not like me, I have a routine when I'm cutting cardstock, and without even realising I'm doing it, I tend to turn it certain ways. But if you've turned your cardstock over another way and you've got this ridge, all you need to do is use your bone folder and run it down the ridge. Those of you that have done it will know exactly what I'm talking about. And all that will do is that will then smooth out that ridge, because otherwise it's sort of highlights the cut edge. I think it's what it is as you press down and pull down your trimmer, it sort of pushes the fibres. There we go. Okay, so that's my top tip for getting rid of that. Okay, so what we're going to do is a little bit of stamping now. So these are the stamps. I'm just going to move that block out of the way because I don't want to get ink. I'm just going to pop that down on the floor before I wash it. I don't want to get ink on my cardstock. So what we're going to do now, we're going to bring some sorry, I've just realised I'd left a die on the desk, and that's how you lose things, so always put them away when you've done with them. Right, I'm going to bring in some blocks now and mount up some stamps. So the first stamp that we're going to use is, and I've got my Very Vanilla behind so you can see, we're going to use the outline stamps of the larger daisy. So we want this one. No, we don't. Do we want that one? No, we don't actually. We want the smaller one, which is this one here. That's why I couldn't see it. Don't worry if your photopolymer stamps get discoloured. It won't do them any damage. It doesn't affect how they stamp, and they work just the same. And if anything, actually, I don't know about you, but I think it makes them easier to see. Right, so we need that one. We need, you can see exactly which ones I'm going to use. We need this little leaf, and we need the centre of the daisy, and that's all for now. We're going to pop those back in there, get those out of the way. Don't need that block, do need this one, and we'll have a skinny one. These blocks, in case you're wondering, these are the blocks that come out of our kits. So if you buy a kit from Stampin' Up that's a stamping kit, they're really good value. They're usually around about £22-ish. But as well as all the base cards, envelopes and pre-cut bits for the cards that you need to make the cards up, you also get a block, a mini stamping spot and a small stamp set. So I save all my blocks to use afterwards, and they're really nice blocks. I've got little hands, so I find it really hard sometimes with big blocks, big thick blocks like this. Can just, you know, hold that properly. I've also got carpal tunnel, so these nice light blocks are nice for me to use. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to randomly stamp around the edge, and I am bringing in Moody Mauve for the flowers. And as I said, we just want to go randomly around the edge. You can go in on some. You're only going to see a bit of this. And this is why I've kept it on my scrap paper, because as you can see, I'm stamping off the edge, and I've obviously got ink on my thumb. And that one was a really bad stamp. I'll go back on that one. Now, the beauty of cardstock, if you just do what I've done and put a big smudge on it, is you can turn it over and do the other side. Now, just be careful not to get too much ink on the edge of your block. Ideally, the way to avoid that is to only use a block the size that you need for the stamp that you're using. I'm making a very good job of this. I forgot to put a stamp mat underneath. Okay, so that's that one. And then the next colour, these ink pads are my new ones and they're really stiff. The next colour we're going to go in with is going to be the Wild Wheat, and we're going to do the leaf. Just popping it out inside, in between the flowers. Again, as I said, remember you're only going to see the edges because we're going to have that piece of embossed watercolouring we did earlier. So I'm just sort of going in with half the, hopefully you can see what I'm doing, half the leaf stamp. Okay, so that's that one. And then what we're going to do, just going to quickly wipe that off because I've got quite a lot of ink on there. And then what we're going to do is bring in the copper clay. Wasn't sure about this colour at first, but it's growing on me. And then we're just going to fill in some of the middles. Of our flowers. So this stamp set is actually a two-step stamp set. So you do get, not doing this very well, am I? You do get the option to fill in these outline flowers, but for this I thought the outline would work nicely. Okay, so let me just attempt to close these ink pads up without breaking all my nails. There we go. Okay, right. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that scrap paper now. What we're going to do now is we're going to bring back the rest of our card bits. So this was our base card, the one I got a splodge on. And what we're going to do, we're going to stick our layer onto the front of that card. Just remember, less is more with wet glue, but I'm using wet glue to give me the option to reposition it. Now, I always open out my card bases because then they don't bounce around when you're trying to line up your layers. Okay, I think that's fairly level. And then on top of that, we're going to add our piece of boho blue watercolour paper. Now, I find, especially when you've embossed something, that it's always better to use liquid glue. You can use tape, you can use dimensionals, but I find that the liquid glue tends to give a better adhesion because you've not got flat cardstock. And that is going to go in the middle there. Okay, So what I then did, and I'm not going to do this while I'm recording so that you don't have to listen to me waffle on, I then bought in the dies, which are these. Now the thing I really like about these dies is that Stampin' Up have been very considerate to our RSI from die cutting. And oh sorry, my phone's on charge and I caught the wire then. And what they've done is they've given us this die. So this die cuts all of this out in one go, but it does actually match the flowers that are in the stamp set. So it matches this large flower, this small flower, and then this half flower, and then these little leaves match as well. And there are dies for the individual flowers and the half flower and the leaf as well included in the die sets. There we go. So that's the leaf. So that's that leaf there. And then you've got the two different sizes of single flower, and the half flower is there. And there are a few extras as well. There's a stalk, and there's this really nice label die here, which I've used on some other cards that I'll show you soon. Okay, so what I've done, as I said, I'm not going to do it now because you don't need to listen to me waffle while I die cut. So I've cut this die, and I cut this die out of white. And then what I did is I used the coordinating dies, which are these ones. So that's the large flower, that's the middle-sized flower, and there is one for the half a flower, which is here. And those I've cut out in Moody Mauve, and then I've just layered them up over the top so you can see on this one. And it does, so there we go, they do fit on, and it does make itself obvious once you've cut them and you get them the right way around to fit on. Okay, so just to give you that idea. And then what I've done is I've cut the leaves from some wild wheat, just use the outline die, and then they fit perfectly behind these dies here. So I've stuck those behind, the leaves are behind and the flowers are on top. Okay, so then all I'm going to do is, I've already prepared this with some mini dimensionals. The full-size dimensionals are a little bit big and you can see them through the die cut. So I'm just taking the backs off here. And then all I'm going to do is stick this into the right hand corner. It's overlapping, which is fine. Have I stuck that on wonky? No, sorry, it just looked wonky for a minute. Now I've stuck that. So I'm just going to stick that to the corner so it's overlapping. And then there's our card finished. Now you could add a greeting. Oh, no, we're not finished. You can add a greeting. I tend not to add greetings to my cards until I know who I'm sending them for and why. I just find that way I've got a stash of cards that are suitable for lots and lots of different reasons. And then I just add a sentiment to the card when I know who I'm sending it to and what it's for. So I just find that easier. I used to always put a sentiment on, but then when I was looking for a card to send somebody, I wouldn't necessarily have the right sentiment. Okay, so I've just brought in some of our basic pearls here, and I'm just using the small ones just to finish this off. I'm just going to add a few of the basic pearls to our boho blue watercolour layer. There we go. And in general terms, I tend to stick to odd numbers, so I've put 3 on there. The other thing that you can do if you want to give it a little bit of shimmer, just put those back out of the way, is if you have a Wink of Stella pen that's got some Wink of Stella in it, I'm just checking, what you can actually do is flick, and you probably won't pick this up on here, but I can assure you it's coming out because I'm getting a wet sparkly hand. I don't think that shows, but you are there. Hopefully, there. Hopefully you can see that. So just give it a little bit of a flick by banging it against your finger, and then you can add some shimmer. And I've done that over the whole front. That just gives that a little bit of little bit of shine and shimmer, which is nice. Okay, so that's our card for today. This was my original that I made for the swap, and this was the one that I've made for you today. Hope you like it, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Happy stamping.